The Second World War ended in 1945. The guns stopped. The trials began. The history books were written. And yet, 8 decades later, a remarkable number of the war's most significant questions remain completely unanswered. Not partially answered, not answered with some dispute around the edges, completely unanswered. The third most powerful man in Nazi Germany flew alone to Scotland, and the full truth of why he did it has never been confirmed. The most famous room in Russian imperial history was packed into crates and vanished. 900 American sailors floated in shark-infested water for 4 days because the United States Navy did not know their ship was gone. The man who ran the Gestapo walked out of Hitler's bunker on May 1st, 1945, and was never seen again. These are not fringe theories or conspiracy folklore. Every mystery in this series is built on verified historical documentation, declassified government files, and the established findings of professional historians and investigators. Some questions from the deadliest war in human history are still waiting for answers. Section 1. The Flight of Rudolf Hess. On the evening of May 10, 1941, a Scottish farmer named David McLean walks out of his cottage at Flores Farm, Eaglesham, and finds a German Messerschmitt burning in his field. A man is lying nearby, still tangled in his parachute, struggling to get up. McLean helps him to his feet. The man gives a false name, Captain Alfred Horn, and says he has an important message for the Duke of Hamilton. McLean's mother makes the stranger a cup of tea by the fire while they wait for the home guard to arrive. The stranger is Rudolf Hess. He is not a junior officer. He is the Deputy Führer of Nazi Germany, third in the line of succession behind only Hermann Göring and one of Adolf Hitler's oldest and most loyal companions. He joined the Nazi Party in 1920. He stood beside Hitler at the failed beer hall putsch in 1923. He sat in Landsberg prison and took dictation for Mein Kampf. He has known Hitler for over 2 decades, and on this night, he has just flown alone across the North Sea in a single aircraft, without orders, without an escort, and without telling anyone in the German government where he was going. The flight itself is remarkable. Hess took off from Augsburg at 1745 Central European Time in a Messerschmitt Bf 110E-1/N, a twin-engine heavy fighter fitted with 2 extra fuel tanks that extended its range to 4,200 kilometers. He flew north along the Rhine, crossed the North Sea, and entered British airspace at Farne Island just after 2200. The Royal Observer Corps tracked him the entire way, at one point reporting his altitude at just 50 feet above the ground. 3 RAF aircraft were sent to intercept him. All 3 failed to find him in the dark. By 2306, Hess was nearly out of fuel. He climbed to 6,000 feet and bailed out. His plane crashed and burned. He landed hard, injured his ankle, and was captured within minutes. He had been training for this flight since October 1940, 7 months of preparation. He practiced on the Bf 110 under the chief test pilot at Messerschmitt, Wilhelm Stohr. He selected a specific aircraft, had it held in reserve, and fitted it with navigation equipment for a long solo journey. This was not an impulsive act. Whatever Hess intended, he had been planning it for the better part of a year. His destination was Dungavel House, roughly 12 miles from where he landed, the home of Douglas Hamilton, the 14th Duke of Hamilton. Hess had never met Hamilton. They had both attended a banquet at the 1936 Berlin Olympics and sat at different tables without speaking. But through his friend and advisor Albrecht Haushofer, Hess had become convinced that Hamilton was a leading member of a secret British faction that opposed Churchill and wanted peace with Germany. Haushofer had written to Hamilton in September 1940 to arrange a meeting in Lisbon. That letter was intercepted by MI5. Hamilton never saw it until March 1941. He had not replied because he had never received it. Hess flew to meet a man who had no idea he was coming, on the basis of a letter that had been sitting in British intelligence files for 6 months. When Hamilton interviewed Hess the next morning at Maryhill Barracks in Glasgow, Hess presented his peace proposal. Germany would guarantee the British Empire. Britain would give Germany a free hand in Europe. Churchill would have to go. Hamilton listened, reported everything to London, and made clear he had no interest and no authority. The British government treated Hess not as a diplomat, but as a prisoner of war. Churchill, who was briefed nearly 36 hours after Hess landed, decided immediately that no negotiations would take place. The German government found out what Hess had done on the morning of May 11th. Hitler, according to witnesses, was furious. The Nazi Party told the German public that Hess had suffered a mental disturbance and been grounded from flying for health reasons, and had apparently stolen an aircraft in a state of delusion. Several of Hess's associates were arrested. Joseph Goebbels wrote in his private diary that the German public was rightly asking how such a fool could have been second to the Führer. In London, a 1946 MI5 investigation made public in 1999 concluded that Hess had acted entirely on his own initiative and without Hitler's knowledge or orders. Hess himself, on the night he landed, told the first German-speaking person he could find that he had been forbidden to fly on grounds of age and health, and that he had done it anyway. He attempted suicide on June 16, 1941, by throwing himself down a flight of stairs. He spent the rest of the war in British custody, including 4 days in the Tower of London, the last political prisoner ever held there. He was tried at Nuremberg, convicted of crimes against peace, and sentenced to life in Spandau prison. By 1966, he was the only prisoner left in the building. The Soviet Union blocked every attempt to release him early. On August 17, 1987, at the age of 93, he was found dead. The official cause was suicide by hanging with an electrical cord. His lawyer immediately stated that Hess was too frail to have done it himself. Historian Peter Padfield later argued the suicide note found on the body had been written in 1969, 18 years before his death. The British government kept its files on Hess sealed for decades. Some have only recently been declassified. Others remain restricted. Whether Hitler secretly authorized the mission, whether British intelligence lured Hess through back channels, and what specific peace terms he carried that night, none of it has ever been fully. What is confirmed is this: the third most powerful man in Nazi Germany flew alone across enemy territory, parachuted into a Scottish field, drank tea with a farmer's mother, and spent the next 46 years in a prison cell. The full truth of why he did it died with him in Spandau. The Amber Room had been sitting inside Königsberg Castle for 3 years when Allied bombs began falling on the city. What happened to it next is one of the most contested questions in the history of looted art, and the Soviet Union's behavior in the aftermath suggests they knew far more than they ever admitted. Section 2. The Amber Room. Construction began in 1701 in Prussia. The room was commissioned for Charlottenburg Palace in Berlin, designed by German Baroque sculptor Andreas Schluter, and built by Danish amber craftsman Gottfried Wolfram. It was made from 6 tons of amber panels backed with gold leaf, decorated with mirrors, gilded carvings, Florentine stone mosaics, and figurines. When candlelight hit the walls, the entire room glowed orange and gold. It covered more than 55 square meters. Frederick I of Prussia never saw it finished. He died in 1713, with the project still incomplete. His son, Frederick William I, had no interest in it. In 1716, he shipped the panels to Russia as a diplomatic gift to Tsar Peter the Great, securing a Prussian-Russian alliance against Sweden. Peter received the room in 18 large boxes. He never lived to see it installed. His daughter, Empress Elizabeth, eventually had it moved to the Catherine Palace at Tsarskoye Selo, outside St. Petersburg, in 1755. Italian architect Bartolomeo Francesco Rastrelli redesigned it to fit the larger space, adding more amber shipped from Berlin. By the time it was finished, it was being called the 8th wonder of the world. It stayed in the Catherine Palace for nearly 200 years. It survived the Russian Revolution. It survived the entire First World War. Then, in the autumn of 1941, the German Army Group North reached Tsarskoye Selo. Soviet curators had tried to save it. Head curator Anatoly Kuchumov attempted to dismantle the amber panels for evacuation, but the amber had dried out over the centuries and had become brittle. Pieces crumbled when touched. The decision was made to hide the room instead. Wallpaper was hung over the panels in the hope the Germans would walk past it. They did not. Hitler considered the Amber Room a German creation that belonged on German soil. His troops knew exactly what they were looking for. Within 36 hours, they had stripped the room completely, packed it into 27 crates, and shipped everything to Königsberg Castle on the Baltic coast. By November 1941, the Amber Room was on display in Königsberg under the supervision of the Castle Museum director, Alfred Rode. It stayed there for 2 years. Then the RAF arrived. In August 1944, British bombers hit Königsberg in 2 heavy raids. The city burned. The castle was damaged. Rode, on orders from Berlin, had already begun packing the amber panels into crates again in late 1943. By January 12, 1945, a German museum director made what appears to be the last confirmed sighting of the Amber Room intact. After that date, the trail goes dark. The Red Army stormed Königsberg between April 6th and April 9th, 1945. The city fell on April 9th. The Amber Room was not found. Rode was still in the city. He had survived the siege in his apartment. He said nothing about where the room had gone. He died in a local hospital in December 1945 and took whatever he knew with him. The Soviet government sent investigator Alexander Brusov to Königsberg in early 1946. Brusov searched the ruins of the castle and wrote an official report. His conclusion? The Amber Room was destroyed between April 9th and April 11th, 1945, in the final fighting. As evidence, he noted that 3 of the 4 Florentine stone mosaics that had been part of the room were found in the castle's cellar, burned and damaged. His report stated plainly that the room had not survived. Then the Soviet government continued searching for the next 4 decades. That contradiction has never been satisfactorily explained. If Brusov's official conclusion was correct, that the room was destroyed, there was nothing left to find. Yet the Soviet government formed a commission in 1967 specifically to search for the Amber Room in known art repositories across the USSR and Germany. That commission searched until 1984. Some historians believe the continued searches were Cold War propaganda designed to place blame for the room's destruction on the Nazis rather than admit Soviet artillery had finished the job. Others believe the Soviets suspected their own soldiers had looted individual panels in the chaos of the city's fall and were quietly trying to recover them. In 1997, German art investigators raided a lawyer's office in Bremen on a tip that someone was trying to sell a piece of the Amber Room. They found one of the 4 Florentine mosaics, a panel called Feel and Touch, in the possession of the son of a deceased German soldier. The son had no idea of its origin or value. The mosaic was confiscated. It is the only confirmed recovered piece of the original Amber Room. Its recovery proved that at least some material survived past the bombing. It also proved that German soldiers had individually looted pieces during the evacuation. Several witnesses claimed after the war that they saw amber panels being loaded onto the Wilhelm Gustloff, a German ship that left Gdynia in January 1945 and was torpedoed and sunk by a Soviet submarine. The wreck has been explored multiple times. No Amber Room material has been found aboard it. In October 2020, Polish divers found the wreck of the German cargo steamer SS Karlsruhe, which sank in April 1945, carrying goods evacuated from Königsberg. Again, no amber panels were found. The most widely accepted conclusion among historians today is that the bulk of the Amber Room was destroyed in the bombing and the subsequent shelling and fires of April 1945. Amber has a relatively low melting point, between 200 and 380 degrees Celsius. The fires that burned through Königsberg Castle in April 1945 were more than sufficient to destroy it entirely. A reconstructed Amber Room, built over 24 years at a cost of approximately $11 million, was installed in the Catherine Palace and opened in 2003. The original has never been found. One piece surfaced in a dead soldier's family home 52 years after the war. The rest is either ash or still hidden somewhere, in a tunnel, at the bottom of the Baltic, or in a private collection that has stayed silent for 80 years. On August 4, 1944, a team of German police and SD officers raided a hidden annex above a canal-side warehouse in Amsterdam. 8 people were arrested. Only 1 survived the war. Who told the Germans where to look has never been conclusively proven. and the most recent attempt to answer that question ended with the investigators publicly discredited and their book pulled from publication. Section 3. Who betrayed Anne Frank? Anne Frank and her family went into hiding on July 6, 1942. They moved into a concealed set of rooms above her father Otto Frank's business premises at Prinsengracht 263 in Amsterdam. The entrance was hidden behind a movable bookcase. Over the following weeks, 4 more people joined them. 8 people in total lived in those rooms for 761 days without stepping outside once. They were not alone in knowing about the hiding place. A small group of Otto's trusted employees knew and actively helped, bringing food, news, and supplies. Miep Gies was one of them. So was Johannes Kleiman, Victor Kugler, and Bep Vosquel. These people risked their own lives every day to keep the 8 people in the annex alive. None of them ever confessed to betraying the hiding place, and no evidence has ever proven that any of them did. On August 4, 1944, at around 10:30 in the morning, a car pulled up outside Prinsengracht 263. A team of Dutch SD officers and German police entered the building, went directly to the bookcase, and found the annex. The operation was led by SS officer Karl Zilberbauer. All 8 people in hiding were arrested. The helpers, Kleiman and Kugler, were also arrested. The 4 helpers who were not present that day, including Miep Gies, were not arrested, and Gies recovered Anne's diary from the floor of the annex after the raid and kept it safe. All 8 people from the annex were deported. Anne and her sister Margot were transferred to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Both died there, most likely in February or March 1945, weeks before British forces liberated the camp in April. Anne was 15 years old. Otto Frank was the only one of the 8 who survived the war. He returned to Amsterdam, recovered the diary from Miep Gies, and published it in 1947. The question of who told the Germans where to look has never been answered. 2 official Dutch investigations were launched, one immediately after the war, and another in 1963, after Zilberbauer was identified and tracked down. Neither produced a confirmed betrayer. Zilberbauer confirmed he led the raid, but said he was acting on a tip and could not or would not say more. 2 Dutch police officers who participated in the arrests, Gesines Gringhaus and Willem Grotendorst, were identified by Otto Frank in 1945. Both were convicted after the war. Neither served their full sentence. In 2016, the Anne Frank House published an investigative report by historian Gert-Jan Broek that raised a question almost no one had asked before. Was there a betrayer at all? Broek noted that the raid lasted more than 2 hours, longer than a typical betrayal raid, where police already know what they are looking for and move quickly. He also noted that the officer in charge, Gringhaus, was primarily an economic fraud investigator, not a Jewish affairs officer. There was illegal labor and ration coupon fraud happening in other parts of the building. Broek concluded it was possible the raid began as a routine economic investigation and stumbled onto the annex by accident. That finding did not settle the debate, it widened it. In January 2022, a cold case team led by retired FBI agent Vince Pankow announced it had identified the most likely betrayer after 6 years of investigation involving roughly 20 researchers, historians, criminologists, archivists, and data specialists. Their conclusion pointed to Arnold Vandenberg, a Jewish notary and member of the Wartime Jewish Council in Amsterdam. The theory held that Vandenberg had provided the Nazis with a list of addresses of Jews in hiding, including Prinsengracht 263, in exchange for protection for himself and his family. The key piece of evidence was an unsigned note. Otto Frank had received it after the war, apparently naming Vandenberg as the person who gave up the annex address. Otto typed a copy of the note and kept it. He never spoke of it publicly. The cold case team located Otto's copy in 2018, buried in the files of a former investigator's son. The team argued that Otto stayed silent to protect Vandenberg's daughters from blame, and because he understood that Vandenberg, a Jewish man living under Nazi occupation, had faced an impossible situation. The book presenting the findings, written by Canadian author Rosemary Sullivan and published in January 2022, generated enormous international attention. Within weeks, it was also generating significant pushback from historians. By March 2022, a group of prominent World War II researchers had conducted their own counter-investigation. Their conclusion was direct. The evidence against Vandenberg was not sufficient to name him as the betrayer. The Anne Frank House issued its own statement supporting the counter-investigation, saying that key pieces of evidence were missing and that Vandenberg could not be accused on what was available. The Dutch publisher of the book pulled it from publication. The intended English-language publisher also dropped it. The Anne Frank House's official position today remains unchanged from what it was before the cold case investigation began. No one has been conclusively identified as the person responsible for the raid on August 4, 1944. It is not even certain a deliberate betrayal occurred. What is certain is this: 8 people hid in a concealed annex for 761 days. Someone or something led SD officers directly to a bookcase in a canal-side building in Amsterdam on a Tuesday morning in August 1944. 7 of the 8 people arrested that day died. The one who survived never publicly named the person he apparently believed was responsible. Otto Frank died in 1980. Whatever he knew, he chose not to say. On December 15, 1944, 4 months after the raid on the annex, a small military plane carrying one of the most famous musicians in America took off from a field in Bedfordshire, England, and vanished over the English Channel. The U.S. Army did not know the plane was missing for 72 hours. The reason why reveals a chain of institutional failures that has never been fully explained. Section 4. The disappearance of Glenn Miller. At 13:55 on December 15, 1944, a Nordine C-64 Norseman, serial number 44-70285, lifted off from RAF Twinwood Field in Bedfordshire, England. 3 people were on board. The pilot was Flight Officer John Morgan. Lieutenant Colonel Norman Basel was a passenger. The third man was Major Alton Glenn Miller, the most popular bandleader in America, whose orchestra had produced the first gold record in music history with Chattanooga Choo Choo in 1941. The plane was headed to Villacoublay Aerodrome near Versailles, France. Miller was supposed to arrive ahead of his Army Air Forces band, which was being relocated to Paris to perform for Allied troops following the liberation of the city. He never arrived. Neither did Morgan or Basel. No distress signal was received. No wreckage was found. No bodies were ever recovered. The U.S. Army did not know Miller was on that plane. He had boarded as what the military called a casual passenger, someone hitching a ride on an available aircraft without formally notifying his chain of command. His name was not on the flight manifest in any way that triggered a search when the plane went missing. His band flew separately to Paris on 3 C-47 transport aircraft, landed safely, and began preparing for their scheduled Christmas Day broadcast. When Miller did not appear, his band manager, Lieutenant Don Haynes, eventually came forward to confirm that he had driven Miller and Basel to the airfield himself on the afternoon of December 15th. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force did not become aware the plane was missing until December 18th, 72 hours after takeoff. The reason the gap was that long comes down to a combination of Miller's unauthorized boarding, the lack of any formal flight record connecting him to the Norsemen, and the fact that the day after Miller disappeared, December 16th, the Germans launched the massive counteroffensive that became the Battle of the Bulge. Every available piece of military attention shifted immediately to Belgium. A missing band leader was not a priority. Miller's wife Helen was notified of his disappearance on December 23rd by 2 senior officers who visited her at home, followed by a telephone call from General H. Arnold. The public was told on December 24th, 9 days after the plane went down. The 8th Air Force launched a formal investigation. On January 20th, 1945, it issued a classified report concluding that the most probable cause was a combination of carburetor icing and fuel line freezing. The C-64 Norseman had a known defect with its carburetor heater that made it vulnerable in cold conditions. On December 15, 1944, the temperature over the English Channel was below freezing, and the plane was flying on visual flight rules below heavy cloud cover, close to the water. The investigation concluded that icing caused engine failure, giving the pilot roughly 8 seconds to react before the aircraft hit the water. A plane made largely of wood and fabric hitting the channel at speed would have disintegrated almost completely, which explains why no wreckage was ever located. That report was then boxed up, shipped to the United States with other wartime records, and locked away. No one outside the military read it for decades. Miller's family, his bandmates, and the public were left with nothing. Into that silence, conspiracy theories moved in and stayed. The most persistent alternative theory holds that a formation of RAF Lancaster bombers, returning from an aborted mission over Germany, jettisoned their unused bomb loads over the English Channel on the afternoon of December 15th, and that one bomb struck Miller's plane. A veteran airman first made this claim in a bar in South Africa in 1984, 40 years after the event. Archivist Dennis Spragg, who was given full access to US and British military archives by Miller's son Stephen in 2009, investigated this theory directly. The documented timeline shows the Lancaster bomb jettisons occurred between 1300 and 1330. Miller's plane did not take off until 1355. The Lancasters were back at their bases before the Norsemen left the runway. The friendly fire theory is factually impossible based on the documented time. Spragg's investigation, the results of which were published in the book Glenn Miller Declassified in 2017 and accepted by US and British military agencies as the authoritative account, confirmed the 1945 military inquiry's conclusion: carburetor icing, engine failure, impact with the channel. No foul play, no cover-up of the cause of death. Only a cover-up, by silence, of the fact that the military had known the probable answer since January 1945 and told no one. The wreck itself has never been located. The English Channel is deep, heavily trafficked, and has shifted sediment continuously for 80 years. In the 1980s, a fisherman claimed to have pulled up wreckage matching the Norseman's description off Portland Bill, approximately 150 miles west of the required flight path. Spragg examined this claim and found it contradicted by the documented paint color of the aircraft and the physical improbability of an intact plane after 4 decades of immersion. The International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery investigated a possible location in 2019. Nothing further was reported. Miller's name is engraved on the tablets of the missing at Cambridge American Cemetery in England. So are the names of Morgan and Basil. All 3 are listed as missing in action. Their remains were never recovered and are not recoverable. Glenn Miller was 40 years old when he disappeared. His band performed their Christmas Day broadcast from Paris as scheduled, without him, 4 days after his wife had been told he was gone. The plane, the bodies, and the wreck are almost certainly at the bottom of the English Channel. Exactly where has never been confirmed. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. 15 days after Miller's plane went down, and thousands of miles away in the Pacific, a heavy cruiser called USS Indianapolis was completing a secret mission that would directly contribute to ending the war. 6 months later, it was at the bottom of the ocean, and nearly 900 men were floating above it in shark-infested water, with no one coming to save them, because the United States Navy did not know the ship was gone. Section 5. The USS Indianapolis. On July 16, 1945, the atomic bomb was tested for the first time in the New Mexico desert. 10 days later, USS Indianapolis pulled into the dock at Tinian Island in the Pacific and unloaded a wooden crate and a metal canister. Inside them were the core components of Little Boy, the uranium bomb that would be dropped on Hiroshima on August 6th. The 2 Army officers who had accompanied the cargo from San Francisco, traveling as artillery specialists, were in fact a radiologist and an engineer from the Manhattan Project. Nobody on the ship had been told what they were carrying. Indianapolis had made the crossing from Hunters Point, San Francisco to Tinian in 10 days, setting a speed record that still stands. After unloading, the ship sailed to Guam and then set course for Leyte Gulf in the Philippines, where it was due to arrive on July 31st to prepare for the planned invasion of Japan. It was sailing alone, without an escort. Captain Charles McVeigh had requested a destroyer escort and been denied. Just after midnight on July 30th, 1945, Japanese submarine I-58, commanded by Mochitsura Hashimoto, spotted Indianapolis on the surface and fired 6 torpedoes. 2 struck the ship on the starboard side, directly beneath the fuel tanks. The explosions were catastrophic. The bow was blown off. The ship listed immediately and began going under. Indianapolis sank in 12 minutes. Of the 1,196 men aboard, approximately 300 went down with the ship. The remaining 900 made it into the water. The ship sank so fast that most men had no time to dress. Many were in their underwear or completely naked when they hit the water. Virtually no life rafts made it off the ship. Most men had only life jackets. No distress signal reached any Allied station. The attack happened too fast, and the damage was too severe. 3 separate shore stations did receive signals related to the attack, but all 3 failed to act. 1 officer was drunk. 1 had ordered his men not to disturb him, and 1 believed the message was a Japanese trap. None of them reported it up the chain of command. When Indianapolis failed to arrive at Leyte Gulf on July 31st as scheduled, no search was launched. The existing protocol at the time did not require port authorities to report or investigate a warship that failed to arrive on time. The operations plotting board at the headquarters of Commander Marianas showed Indianapolis's expected movements. No one flagged the absence. The Navy did not know the ship was gone. For 4 days and 5 nights, the survivors floated in the Philippine Sea. During the day, the sun dehydrated them. At night, the temperature dropped and hypothermia set in. Men drank seawater out of desperation, which accelerated dehydration and caused hallucinations. Groups of survivors began to fracture. Some men, delirious, attacked each other believing they were Japanese soldiers. Others simply stopped moving and slipped under. And then there were the sharks. Oceanic white-tip sharks were drawn to the wreck site within hours. They fed on the dead first, then began taking the living. Survivor accounts describe men being pulled under mid-sentence. The exact number of deaths attributed to shark attacks has never been precisely established. Estimates range from a few dozen to over 150. A 2007 documentary produced for Discovery Channel's Shark Week concluded the sinking of Indianapolis resulted in the largest number of shark attacks on humans in recorded history. On August 2nd, 3 days after the sinking, Navy pilot Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn was on a routine patrol flight when he moved to the back of his aircraft to fix an antenna and looked down at the ocean below. He saw an oil slick. Then he saw the men. He immediately radioed his base, many men in the water, and dropped survival equipment. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Richard Atterbury, arrived and took over circling, while Gwynn returned to base on low fuel. Lieutenant Commander Adrian Marks, flying a PBY Catalina, arrived and made the decision to land on open ocean, against standing orders, to begin pulling men directly from the water. Marks's plane was so full of survivors, he had men tied to the wings. The first rescue ship, USS Cecil J. Doyle, arrived after nightfall on August 2nd and used its searchlight as a beacon. 7 ships in total participated in the rescue. When it was over, 316 men were alive out of the 1,196 who had been aboard 4 days earlier. The U.S. government did not announce the disaster to the public until August 15, 1945, the same day Japan announced its surrender. The news was buried. Captain McVeigh survived. He was court-martialed in November 1945, the only U.S. Navy captain to be court-martialed for losing a ship in combat during the entire war. He was convicted of hazarding his ship by failing to zigzag. The Japanese submarine commander Hashimoto testified at the trial that zigzagging would not have prevented his attack. It made no difference to the verdict. McVeigh received hate mail from the families of dead sailors for the rest of his life, blaming him for their sons' deaths. In 1968, he was found dead outside his home in Litchfield, Connecticut, a toy sailor in one hand and one of the hate mail letters in the other. He had shot himself. In 2000, the U.S. Congress passed a resolution exonerating McVeigh. In 2001, the Navy placed a memorandum in his record, clearing him of all wrongdoing. In August 2017, a research vessel funded by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen located the wreck of Indianapolis at a depth of 5,500 meters on the floor of the Pacific Ocean. The full accountability for who received the distress signals on July 30th and chose not to act has never been formally established. The officers involved were never charged. On January 17, 1945, 6 months before Indianapolis went down, a Swedish diplomat in Budapest climbed into a car with a Soviet military escort and was driven away. He was never seen as a free man again. What the Soviet Union did with him over the next 46 years is one of the most deliberately concealed stories of the entire war. Section 6. Raoul Wallenberg. Raoul Wallenberg arrived in Budapest on July 9, 1944. He was 31 years old, Swedish, and had no prior diplomatic experience. He had studied architecture in the United States and had been working in international trade. The Swedish Foreign Ministry sent him to Hungary with a diplomatic passport, backing from the U.S. War Refugee Board, and a specific assignment: save as many Jewish lives as possible before the German deportation machine finished its work. He had 6 months. By the time Wallenberg arrived, Hungary's Jewish population was already being decimated. Adolf Eichmann had been in Budapest since March 1944, overseeing deportations. Hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews had already been sent to Auschwitz. The Jews remaining in Budapest, roughly 200,000, were the last large Jewish population in occupied Europe still alive. Wallenberg's primary tool was a document he designed himself.
The Swedish protective passport, the Schutzpass, identified the holder as a Swedish subject awaiting repatriation and placed them under Swedish diplomatic protection. It had no legal standing under German or Hungarian law. Eichmann knew it had no legal standing. Wallenberg issued them anyway, in the thousands, and backed them with enough diplomatic confidence that Hungarian and German officials repeatedly accepted them as valid, rather than create an international incident with neutral Sweden. He rented 32 buildings in Budapest and declared them Swedish diplomatic territory, sheltering approximately 10,000 people inside them. On November 20th, 1944, Eichmann ordered death marches, tens of thousands of Jews forced to walk toward Austria in freezing conditions with no food or adequate clothing. Wallenberg drove to the march routes personally, distributed food, medicine, and Schutzpasses to people in the columns, and physically pulled individuals out of the lines in front of armed guards, insisting they were under Swedish protection. His fellow Swedish diplomat Per Unger, who witnessed this, later said Wallenberg operated with a fearlessness that bordered on recklessness. On January 13, 1945, the Red Army located Wallenberg at his residence at 16 Benser Street in Budapest and reported his presence to Moscow headquarters. 4 days later, on January 17th, Soviet officers arrived to escort him to a meeting with Soviet Marshal Malinovsky in Debrecen. Wallenberg told Per Unger he was going, adding that he did not know whether he was going as a guest or a prisoner. His last confirmed words to a colleague: "I am going to Malinovsky's. Whether as a guest or prisoner, I do not know yet." He was never seen as a free man again. Documents recovered in 1993 from Soviet military archives show that an arrest order for Wallenberg had been signed by Soviet Deputy Defense Minister Nikolai Bulganin and transmitted to Malinovsky's headquarters on January 17th, the same day Wallenberg left. He was taken to Moscow and imprisoned in Lubyanka, the headquarters of the NKVD secret police. For 12 years, the Soviet Union said nothing official. They told Swedish representatives in 1945 that Wallenberg was under Soviet care and would reappear once the situation settled. Then they said they had lost track of him. Then they said they had no information. The Swedish government, fearful of antagonizing Stalin and prioritizing its relationship with Moscow over the fate of one diplomat, accepted these answers with almost no pushback. A 2003 Swedish government report on the affair described its own country's foreign policy response as a diplomatic failure. In April 1945, U.S. diplomat Averell Harriman offered the Swedish government American help in searching for Wallenberg. Sweden declined. In 1957, 12 years after Wallenberg's arrest,
the Soviet government broke its official silence. Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko announced that Wallenberg had died of a heart attack in Lubyanka prison on July 17, 1947. As evidence, the Soviets released a document signed by the head of the prison's medical department, Alexander Smoltsov, stating that the prisoner Wallenberg had died suddenly in his cell, probably from cardiac failure. The document also noted that Smoltsov had been ordered to perform no autopsy and to cremate the body immediately. The order to skip the autopsy and destroy the body came from Viktor Abakumov, the head of Soviet state security, a man who reported directly to Stalin. Historians have pointed out that a document ordering the concealment of cause of death is not evidence of natural death. It is evidence that someone did not want the cause of death known. Returning Soviet prisoners in the 1950s reported encountering a Swede in the prison system. Reported sightings of Wallenberg in Soviet camps came from multiple sources through the 1950s and in one account as late as 1975. A joint Swedish-Russian commission investigated from 1991 to 2000 and concluded in its published report that the Soviet documents on Wallenberg had been purposefully destroyed or altered. The commission could not confirm what had happened to him or when he died. In 2016, the published diaries of Ivan Serov, the first chairman of the KGB, stated that Wallenberg had been executed on Stalin's personal orders in 1947, and that a document signed by two Lubyanka officials confirming the cremation of his body existed in the files. Serov's diaries are themselves disputed by some historians. Russia has never formally acknowledged executing Wallenberg. The full KGB file on him has never been released. Sweden officially declared him dead on October 26, 2016, 71 years after his arrest. His official date of death is listed as July 31, 1952, chosen administratively as 5 years after the last credible evidence he was alive. Wallenberg's half-brother Guy von Dardel spent the remainder of his life searching for answers, traveling to the Soviet Union approximately 50 times and compiling a 50,000-page archive of documents, interviews, and correspondence. He died in 2016 without receiving a definitive answer from Russia. Israel recognized Wallenberg as righteous among the nations at Yad Vashem in 1963. The United States made him an honorary citizen in 1981, an honor previously extended only to Winston Churchill. What the Soviet Union did with him remains, officially, unresolved. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Beneath the Owl Mountains in southwestern Poland, the Nazis built something enormous between 1943 and 1945, using tens of thousands of slave laborers. They destroyed the blueprints when they left. The true purpose of what they built has never been established, and what may still be hidden inside it has fueled one of the most persistent treasure legends in European history. Section 7. Project Reese and the Nazi Gold Train. In late 1943, Adolf Hitler ordered construction to begin on one of the largest and most secretive building projects of the entire war. The location was the Owl Mountains in Lower Silesia, a region of southwestern Poland then inside German-controlled territory. The project was given the codename Reese. In German, that word means giant. What was being built was a network of 7 separate underground complexes, each with its own entrance, carved directly into the granite mountains. None of the 7 sections were connected to each other. The tunnels descended to depths of between 65 and 165 feet. The walls and ceilings were reinforced concrete. Albert Speer, Hitler's chief architect and the minister responsible for overseeing the project, estimated in his memoirs that a total of 213,000 cubic meters of tunnels had been excavated by the time construction stopped. Today, approximately 90,000 cubic meters are known and partially accessible. The remaining 123,000 cubic meters have never been found or explored. The workforce was slave labor. Prisoners were transferred from concentration camps including Auschwitz, Polish, Soviet, Italian, and Czechoslovakian prisoners of war, along with thousands of Jewish prisoners. Children as young as 10 were documented working on the site, pushing mining carts and performing manual tasks. The prisoners dug into gneiss rock, which has roughly the same hardness as steel, in cold, humid, and structurally dangerous conditions. The total number of prisoners who worked on Project Risa has been estimated at between 7,000 and 30,000. The mass graves of the prisoner workforce have never been found. Construction stopped in early 1945 as the Red Army advanced rapidly across Eastern Europe toward Germany. An SS unit remained in the Owl Mountains until May 1945. Before leaving, they demolished and bricked up every entrance they could reach, and removed or destroyed all construction blueprints and documentation. When Soviet forces took control of the area, they found the tunnels sealed and the records gone. No document has ever been found that states explicitly what the complex was designed to do. Speer's memoirs note that, if completed, the complex could have housed 20,000 people. Beyond that, he is not specific. The official Nazi construction documentation for Project Risa has never surfaced. Every explanation for its purpose, Führer headquarters, underground weapons factory, chemical or biological research facility, industrial production complex, is a theory built on physical evidence and incomplete records. None has been definitively confirmed. Into that documented uncertainty, a legend was born. German miners working in the Owl Mountains in the final weeks of the war later claimed they had seen a Nazi train loaded with crates being driven into one of the tunnel entrances before the SS sealed it. The story passed from miner to miner, from generation to generation, in the towns surrounding the mountains. The train, in the telling, carried gold, jewels, looted artwork, and weapons, the accumulated treasure of the Nazi regime being hidden from the approaching Red Army. The Polish army searched the tunnels and the surrounding mountains repeatedly during the Cold War. Nothing was found. The searches stopped. The legend did not. In August 2015, two amateur treasure hunters, Piotr Koper, a Polish construction company owner, and Andreas Richter, a German geologist, went public with a claim that ground-penetrating radar had located a buried object near the 65-kilometer mark of the Wrocław-Wałbrzych railway line, approximately 8 to 9 meters underground, measuring roughly 98 meters in length. They said it was the train. The announcement created a genuine international frenzy. Polish authorities cordoned off the area and deployed police and additional security to keep treasure hunters out. Poland's Deputy Culture Minister, Piotr Zuchowski, stated publicly that he was 99% convinced the train existed. The World Jewish Congress issued an immediate statement reminding Polish authorities that any valuables found that had belonged to Jewish Holocaust victims must be returned to their rightful owners or heirs. Tourism to the Wałbrzych region increased by approximately 45%. A team of university scientists and geologists conducted their own non-invasive radar examination of the site. Their conclusion? There may be a subsurface anomaly, but there is no train. The shapes Koper and Richter had identified were consistent with natural ice formations in the ground, not with a metal object. Koper and Richter were unconvinced. They secured permission from Polish railways, which own the land, and privately funded an excavation at a cost of €116,000. Digging began in August 2016. It lasted 7 days. No tunnel was found. No tracks were found. No train was found. The excavation was halted and the site was restored. The legend, however, did not end there. Koper subsequently shifted his search to other locations in the region. In a separate project years later, he discovered 24 priceless 16th century Renaissance portraits hidden behind a plaster wall during renovation work at a palace in the Polish village of Struga. Genuine hidden treasure from the war era, recovered through careful searching. That discovery demonstrated that real wartime caches do exist in the region. It did not demonstrate that the gold train exists. What is established fact is this: the Nazis built an enormous underground complex in the Owl Mountains using slave labor. They destroyed the blueprints when they left. Albert Speer's own estimate suggests more than half the tunnel system remains undiscovered. An SS unit had 6 weeks in early 1945 to place whatever they wanted inside those tunnels before sealing the entrances. The prisoner workforce that could have served as witnesses was never accounted for. Whether a treasure-laden train is inside the mountain is unproven. What is inside the remaining 123,000 cubic meters of sealed Nazi tunnels
is unknown to anyone alive today. On the night of February 24th to 25th, 1942, less than 3 months after Pearl Harbor, air raid sirens woke the entire city of Los Angeles. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire into the sky above one of America's largest cities. When it was over, the U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy gave the public two completely different explanations for what had happened, and neither account has ever been fully reconciled. Section 8. The Battle of Los Angeles. The fear was real, and it was justified. On December 7, 1941, Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor and killed more than 2,400 Americans. On February 23, 1942, 2 days before the incident over Los Angeles, Japanese submarine I-17 surfaced off the coast of Santa Barbara and shelled the Elwood oil facility for approximately 20 minutes. It was the first attack on the American mainland since the War of 1812. No one was killed, but the psychological effect on the California coast was immediate and severe. Japanese forces had just attacked American soil. The question was not whether they would do it again. The question was when and where. In that climate, at 2:25 on the morning of February 25, 1942, a radar operator at a station south of Los Angeles reported an unidentified object approximately 120 miles west of the city. The report went up the chain of command. At 2:25, a blackout order was issued across Los Angeles County. At 3:16, the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade opened fire. For the next hour, anti-aircraft guns across the Los Angeles basin fired into the sky. The total number of rounds fired was 1,433. Searchlight beams swept back and forth across the darkness. Residents who had been jolted awake sat in blacked-out homes listening to explosions overhead. The firing continued until approximately 4:14, when the all-clear was sounded. When daylight came, there was no wreckage. No downed aircraft, no dead pilot, no physical evidence of any kind that anything had been in the sky above Los Angeles that night. 5 civilians were dead. 2 died of heart attacks attributed to the stress of the alert. 3 died in car accidents that occurred during the blackout. Several buildings in the city sustained damage from shell fragments falling back to the ground after the guns fired. The official response that followed was immediate, public, and completely contradictory. Army Secretary Henry Stimson held a press conference and stated that between 1 and 5 unidentified aircraft had been over Los Angeles during the incident. He suggested they may have been private planes being used by enemy agents for psychological operations or reconnaissance. The Army's position was that something had been there. Navy Secretary Frank Knox held a separate press conference the same day and called the entire incident a false alarm caused by war nerves. He stated there had been no aircraft over Los Angeles, and that the guns had fired at nothing. The Navy's position was that nothing had been there. 2 cabinet-level officials, speaking within hours of each other, gave the American public 2 mutually exclusive accounts of the same event. No reconciliation between the 2 positions was ever issued by the U.S. government. The Los Angeles Times published a front-page photograph on February 26th that became one of the most reproduced images of the incident. It showed searchlight beams converging in the sky above the city, with what appeared to be an object at the point where the beams met. The photograph was widely circulated. It has never been definitively analyzed using modern imaging techniques to establish what, if anything, the beams were illuminating. The original negative has not been subjected to the kind of forensic photographic examination that modern technology would allow. 2 subsequent official investigations produced 2 different conclusions. In 1949, the United States Coast Artillery Association examined the incident and concluded that a weather balloon drifting over the city had triggered the initial radar contact and set off the alert. In 1983, the U.S. Office of Air Force History reviewed the available records and concluded the entire incident was a case of war nerves, mass anxiety following Pearl Harbor and the Santa Barbara shelling, producing a cascade of false reports that fed on each other until the guns opened fire. The 1983 report did not endorse the weather balloon explanation. It simply concluded there had been no physical object at all. The 1949 weather balloon explanation and the 1983 war nerves conclusion are not the same explanation. They have never been reconciled into a single agreed official account. What the documented record establishes without dispute is the following. A radar contact was reported at 2:25. The contact came from a station south of Los Angeles. The blackout was ordered. The guns opened fire. 433 rounds were expended. No enemy aircraft or wreckage was found. 5 civilians died. The Army said something was there. The Navy said nothing was there. Subsequent investigations produced different explanations without agreeing on what triggered the initial radar return. What triggered that first radar contact at 2:25 has never been definitively established from primary documentation. The original radar logs from the night of February 25, 1942, have not been made publicly available in a form that allows independent verification of what the equipment recorded and how the contact was interpreted in real time by the operators on duty. What is also documented is the broader context. In the weeks following Pearl Harbor, the U.S. military along the Pacific coast was receiving multiple false alarm reports of Japanese activity almost daily. Military and civilian nerves were stretched to a breaking point. The Santa Barbara shelling 2 days earlier had confirmed that Japanese submarines were operating close to the California coast. Whatever the guns fired at on the morning of February 25, 1942, the conditions that produced the response were entirely real. The incident was reported in the press, generated 2 days of public controversy, and was then largely overtaken by the larger events of the war. It did not receive serious historical re-examination for decades. The Army said something was there. The Navy said nothing was there. Neither has ever been proven correct. In December 1941, the same month Pearl Harbor was attacked, a set of wooden crates was packed at a research facility outside Beijing and handed to United States Marines for safekeeping. Inside them were fossils representing some of the earliest evidence of human existence in Asia. The Marines were captured by Japanese forces days later. The fossils have not been seen since. Section 9. The Peking Man Fossils. The fossils were found in a cave. Between 1923 and 1937, archaeologists excavating a site called Zhoukou-Dian, approximately 42 kilometers southwest of Beijing, pulled from the earth the skeletal remains of an ancient human species. The bones and teeth belonged to Homo erectus, an early human ancestor who walked upright, made tools, and used fire. The Zhoukou-Dian specimens were approximately 750,000 years old. Scientists named them Sinanthropus pekinensis, later reclassified as Homo erectus pekinensis. The popular name was Peking Man. The significance of the find was enormous. These were not isolated fragments. Over 14 years of excavation, researchers recovered material representing approximately 40 individual specimens: skulls, jawbones, teeth, and limb bones. It was the largest collection of Homo erectus remains ever found in a single location. The fossils provided direct physical evidence of human habitation in Asia hundreds of thousands of years before recorded history. They were irreplaceable. There were no duplicates. Precise plaster casts had been made and distributed to institutions around the world, but the original bones existed only once. By 1941, the fossils were stored at the Peking Union Medical College, under the care of the Geological Survey of China. Japan had occupied much of China since 1937. Japanese forces controlled the region around Beijing. The scientists and administrators responsible for the fossils understood that if Japan moved to seize the college, the specimens would be lost or destroyed. A decision was made to move them to safety. The plan was to transfer the fossils to the United States for storage until the war ended. They were packed into 2 footlockers lined with tissue paper and carefully cushioned. The packing was overseen by Dr. Hu Chengzi, who documented the process. The footlockers were handed to Captain William Foley, a U.S. Marine medical officer stationed at Camp Holcomb in Qinhuangtao, a port city on the Chinese coast. Foley provided a receipt. His orders were to ensure the fossils were loaded onto the SS President Harrison, a U.S. passenger ship scheduled to evacuate American personnel from China. On December 8, 1941, one day after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan declared war on the United States
and moved immediately against American military positions across Asia. Japanese forces arrived at Camp Holcomb and captured the Marines stationed there,
including Foley. The footlockers were not found among the seized American military equipment. What happened to them between the moment Foley received them and the moment Japanese soldiers arrived at the camp has never been established. The SS President Harrison never completed its evacuation mission. On December 8th, the ship ran aground off the Chinese coast while attempting to reach the Marines at Chinwang Tao. Japanese forces boarded and captured it. The ship's manifest for that final voyage has been examined and does not confirm or deny whether the fossils were ever loaded aboard. The ship was refloated by Japan, renamed, and used as a transport vessel for the remainder of the war. Foley survived the war as a prisoner of the Japanese. After his release, he was interviewed multiple times about the fossils. He confirmed receiving the footlockers and confirmed his intention to ensure they reached the ship. He could not confirm what happened to them after his unit was captured. He had no further information. The Chinese government, the American Museum of Natural History, the Smithsonian Institution, and multiple private investigators have searched for the fossils since 1945. Every serious lead has produced nothing. Several individuals over the decades have claimed to know the location of the fossils or to possess them, and have offered to broker their return for substantial sums of money. Every such claim has been investigated and found to be fraudulent. The fossils offered in these transactions were fakes. 4 main possibilities have been considered by researchers. First, the footlockers were lost or destroyed in the chaos of the Japanese capture of Camp Holcomb, broken open, the contents unrecognized as scientifically significant, and discarded or destroyed. Second, the footlockers were loaded onto the SS President Harrison before the ship ran aground, and went down with it or were seized and lost when Japan captured the vessel. Third, Japanese forces found the footlockers at Camp Holcomb, recognized their contents, and the fossils entered Japanese military or government possession, where they may remain in an archive or storage facility, either unidentified or deliberately concealed. Fourth, the fossils were taken by individuals, American, Chinese, or Japanese, during the chaos of December 1941, and have been in private hands ever since, their true nature either unknown to the current holder or deliberately kept secret. No documentary evidence supports any of these 4 possibilities over the others. Japanese wartime records that might shed light on what was seized at Camp Holcomb have either not been located or have not been made accessible to international researchers. The casts made before the war survive in multiple institutions. They are scientifically useful, but they are not the originals. Fossil bones contain biological material that casts do not. Modern DNA extraction and analysis techniques, applied to the original Peking man specimens, could produce information about early human migration and genetics that no cast can provide. Every year the fossils remain missing, that scientific potential remains locked away or destroyed. A wartime conflict built on ideologies about racial hierarchy and national superiority swallowed the physical evidence of humanity's shared ancient origins. The bones that proved all people came from the same ancient ancestors vanished into the same war that was being fought, in part, over claims that they did not. The fossils have not been seen since December 1941. Nobody has ever been charged with their loss. No government has ever formally accepted responsibility. They are either destroyed, hidden, or waiting in a box somewhere that nobody has thought to open. The last mystery in this series involves a man who ran the most feared secret police organization in Nazi Germany. Unlike almost every other senior Nazi official, he left no confirmed grave, no verified body, and no documented escape route. He simply ceased to exist in May 1945, and no government has ever been able to prove with certainty what happened to him next. Section 10. Heinrich Müller, the man who vanished. Heinrich Müller ran the Gestapo. From 1939 until the final days of the war, Müller served as chief of the Gestapo, the Geheime Staatspolizei, Nazi Germany's secret state police. He was not a figurehead. He was the operational commander of the organization that arrested, interrogated, tortured, and dispatched millions of people across occupied Europe. He signed the orders, he ran the machinery. He knew everything: the names of informants,
the methods of every regional office, the details of operations that senior Nazi leaders preferred to keep at arm's length. Of all the men who made the Holocaust function on a day-to-day administrative level, Müller was among the most directly involved. He was last confirmed seen alive in the Führer bunker in Berlin on May 1, 1945, the day after Hitler's suicide. Multiple witnesses placed him there. What happened after he left the bunker has never been established with certainty. Müller was born in Munich in 1900. He served in the German army in World War I as a pilot and was decorated for his service. After the war, he joined the Bavarian political police and built a reputation as a meticulous and ruthless investigator. He was so effective at tracking and suppressing communist activity that the SS recruited him, despite the fact that he had never been a member of the Nazi Party before joining the Gestapo. Reinhard Heydrich brought him in specifically because of his skills. Müller joined the SS in 1934 and the Nazi Party in 1939, the same year he was appointed Gestapo chief. He was present at the Wannsee Conference in January 1942, where senior Nazi officials coordinated the administrative framework for the mass murder of European Jews. He was the operational superior of Adolf Eichmann, who managed the logistics of the deportations. Eichmann was captured in Argentina in 1960 and executed in Israel in 1962. Müller was never found. In 1945, a grave in a Berlin cemetery was identified as possibly containing Müller's remains. In 1963, the grave was exhumed. Inside were the skeletal remains of 3 different individuals. None of them were Müller. How 3 unidentified bodies came to be buried in a grave marked as his has never been explained. The discovery meant there was no confirmed burial site, no confirmed body, and no forensic evidence of his death. The hunt for Müller continued through intelligence agencies on multiple sides of the Cold War. Declassified CIA documents released after 2001 reveal that American intelligence actively searched for Müller through the 1950s and into the 1960s. The CIA files describe him as one of the most dangerous missing Nazis, precisely because of what he knew. A man with Müller's knowledge of informant networks, interrogation methods, and the inner workings of the entire Nazi security apparatus would have been extraordinarily valuable to any intelligence service willing to use him. That observation led to the most serious theory about Müller's post-war fate, that he was recruited by Soviet intelligence and spent the post-war years working for the USSR. The basis for this theory is not purely speculative. CIA documents from the 1950s take the Soviet recruitment possibility seriously enough to investigate it. Müller had spent years studying Soviet intelligence methods and had a professional's respect for how the NKVD operated. He had access to information about Western intelligence networks that would have been valuable to Moscow. Several historians and intelligence researchers, examining the available declassified material, have concluded that Soviet recruitment is the most plausible explanation for why no confirmed trace of Müller appeared in Western Europe, South America, or anywhere in the post-war network of fleeing Nazis that intelligence agencies were monitoring. The second major theory is that Müller escaped through the same rat lines, organized escape networks, that helped other senior Nazis reach South America. Klaus Barbie, the Gestapo chief of Lyon, escaped to Bolivia. Joseph Mengele reached Argentina. Eichmann reached Argentina. The infrastructure existed. Müller had the skills and the contacts to use it. But unlike Barbie, Mengele, and Eichmann, all of whom left traces that were eventually followed, no verified sighting of Müller outside Germany after May 1945 has ever been confirmed. The third possibility is the simple. Müller died in Berlin in the chaos of the city's fall in early May 1945. His body was never identified among the thousands of unidentified dead, and the absence of a confirmed grave is simply the result of the destruction and disorder of the war's final days, rather than evidence of escape. Berlin in May 1945 was a city of ruins, mass graves, and unidentified bodies. It is not impossible that Müller died there and was buried anonymously. What makes this possibility difficult to confirm is the 1963 exhumation. If Müller had simply died and been buried, The grave identified as his in 1945 should have contained his remains. It contained 3 other people. That discrepancy has never been explained. It suggests either that the wrong grave was marked as Muller's from the beginning, or that someone deliberately ensured his actual burial location remained unknown. The Simon Wiesenthal Center, which tracked Nazi war criminals for decades, listed Muller as a priority target until relatively recently. No actionable intelligence on his location was ever developed. No country has ever produced a document, a witness, or physical evidence placing Muller at a confirmed location after May 1, 1945. He was 44 years old when he disappeared. He had run the Gestapo for 6 years. He knew more about the internal machinery of Nazi terror than almost any other individual. And he walked out of the Führer bunker on May 1, 1945, and ceased to exist. No grave, no body, no escape route, no confirmed sighting, no answer. Of all the mysteries in this series, Muller's disappearance is in some ways the most consequential. The men and women in the other sections lost their lives, their freedom, or their life's work to the war. Muller built the system that took those things from them, and then, apparently, simply walked away from it without leaving a trace. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.